Welcome to Monday Night Live, the weekly training that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. As Gary mentioned, my name's Erik Oliver with a company called Cost Segregation Authority, and we work with investors, real estate folks, CPAs, tax preparers all over the country, reducing tax liabilities by doing a few things. We don't do a lot at our firm, but we do a few things very well. So we'll talk about those three things that we do today. First one being cost segregation. And then there are two energy credits that are related to real estate that you guys should probably be aware of that go extremely underutilized. So we'll jump into that. Just a little bit about our company. We've been around since about 2006. We've done about 25,000 studies in all 50 states. We're kind of a niche accounting firm where we don't do tax returns at our firm. We just do these three things. And so really excited to get to know you guys, and feel free, as Gary said, ask questions. I will have some natural breaks in the presentation after each topic, and I'll go ahead and open it up to questions if you have questions. As I mentioned, there's three things we're going to talk about. One of them is called 179D. My guess is most of you, maybe a couple of you have heard about it. 179D is not to get confused with 179. There is a 179 expense that people are more familiar with, but the 179D is a deduction for the construction or improvement of commercial real estate. I'll talk about what that is, who can qualify. Next, we'll talk about 45L. That's a similar program, but that's for residential units. So if you've got clients who are building or improving residential units, they may qualify for a credit. That one's a credit, not a deduction. So it's worth a little bit more. I'm not going to go into depth in either of those, just kind of a highlight so that you guys are aware of them, because they are two of the most underutilized tax credits and deductions out there for real estate investors. And then we'll spend most of our time on cost segregation. I know Gary's familiar with it. I imagine a number of you have heard the term. But we'll kind of dive deep into cost segregation, what it is, and how it can be a powerful tax-saving tool for both you guys and your clients. So to jump into 179D, as I mentioned, 179D is a tax deduction. So remember, a deduction comes off of your taxable income. So it's a tax deduction for the construction of energy-efficient commercial real estate. So if either you or your clients are building new commercial space, so whether it's a dental office, office building, office condo, you may be eligible for up to $5.65 as a deduction per square foot. So the government, remember, uses the tax code to kind of incentivize people to do what they want them to do. And so the government is looking for people to build energy efficient buildings, and therefore they're going to incentivize you if you build these buildings up to certain standards. Now, I'll be honest, the standards are not real difficult to meet. They're basically a 2007 standard, and you have to be 50% greater than that to get the maximum deduction, or 25% greater than that to get the minimum deduction.
Did you say, Erik, that was $5 and something per square foot?
$5.65 of a deduction per square foot. That's correct. For 2024, that's the number. It'll get indexed up a little bit for inflation next year. But right now it's $5.65 per square foot. And that's on a sliding scale. It can be anywhere from $2.50 up to $5.65 per square foot. In order to be eligible for this deduction, you do have to have basis in the building at the time of construction. So you have to be the one paying for the stuff that goes into the building, is the way I think about it. If you're making the decision on what type of insulation, what type of heating and air, what type of lighting goes into the building, that means you're usually paying for it, which means you're eligible for that deduction. So just keep that in mind. That's now, if you do have clients who are architects, contractors, they may be eligible to get this deduction via third party if they're building or designing buildings for tax exempt entities. So if I'm an architect or a building designer, and I am building a building for a school, for example, that school is typically tax exempt, so they don't have any need for that deduction. But me as the architect, I may be eligible to get that deduction via the school if I design the building to be energy efficient. So just kind of a side note there. But for the most part, it's people who are building these buildings who are eligible. If you go buy an existing building, you're probably not going to be eligible for that deduction. Back to the standards, you'll see here the range has varied over the years. It's been anywhere from $1.80 per square foot all the way up to $5.65. The nice thing about this 179D is you can actually go back as far as 2006. So if you've built any buildings or your clients have built any buildings from 2006 to today, they can go back and claim these deductions without having to amend any prior year's tax returns. It does require them to still own the building, so they still have to have some ownership in the building. They can't have sold it, but I've met with a number of clients who build a number of buildings and they've never heard of this, and we were able to catch up all those missed deductions and drop it on the current tax return without having to amend. And you'll see here in 2023, there was a big bump in the deduction. It went from $1.88 per square foot all the way up to $5.36. That was with the Inflation Reduction Act. However, to get those higher dollar amounts, there is a prevailing wage requirement, meaning you have to pay your contractors a certain amount of money based on where they're located in order to qualify. So we won't get into the prevailing wage today. That's a whole nother hour-long subject, but just know that in order to hit that $5.36, you do have to have some prevailing wage requirements, and you got to pay your contractors a certain amount, and we can get into that if you've got a client who you may think is eligible for it.
But they could just go ahead, somebody could just go ahead on their taxes and just write that off, just like as an energy deduction.
No, you've got to have a third party come in and certify it, and we do a certificate. Yeah.
Okay, so you have to have certification for it.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions on the 179D? Like I said, just at a high level, it's really to keep in mind for any of your clients who are building new commercial real estate. It does typically need to be about 20,000 square feet or greater in order for it to financially make sense, because there is a fee associated with getting this type of work done. So anybody who's got 20,000 square feet of commercial space or more that they've built may be eligible for this deduction. It looks like there might be a question in the chat here if I can figure this out. Let's see. For after class explanation. Oh yeah, I think someone's asking a question about after class. So I'll let you answer that, Gary, when we get done here.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. With that, we'll continue on. So let's talk a little bit now about the 45L tax credit. So this is a credit, not a deduction. So remember, a credit comes right off the top of your tax bill. Now, this credit is for the construction of energy efficient residential units. So if you or somebody you know is building new residential units, a unit or a dwelling unit, as the IRS calls it, it has to have three things. It has to have a place to eat, sleep, prepare food, and use the restroom. Actually, four things. And if it has those things, then it meets the definition of a dwelling unit, and you may be eligible for up to a $5,000 credit per dwelling unit that you are building. So if you build a fourplex, you may be eligible for a $20,000 credit. And remember, that comes right off the top of your tax bill. We're examining the same types of things. You do have to have a third party come in, just like the 179D. If it meets certain qualifications, we will go ahead and issue a certificate that allows you to be able to take this credit. This credit is for the builder, not necessarily the investor who buys the building that the builder built. So again, you've got to have basis in this property at the time of construction. Now, if I'm an investor and I go hire Gary to build me a building, and I say, hey, Gary, I'm going to take the loan out. I just need you to do the building of the building. I am eligible for the credit because I took the loan out and I carried that construction loan throughout the development stage. So on both the 179D and the 45L, remodeling projects may qualify. They're a little bit more difficult to qualify for, especially on the 45L, because we're looking at things like the building envelope. So that's typically the exterior windows, the exterior walls, the insulation in the attic, the insulation in the walls. In order to qualify, if I buy an existing fourplex, for example, I would have to go in and basically gut that down to the studs, put in new windows, new insulation, new HVAC, new lighting in order for it to qualify. So oftentimes when we do remodel jobs, we might go in and put in new cabinets, counters, and carpet, but we don't always necessarily take out the insulation in the windows. And so that's why it's a little more difficult, but I have seen a few projects that were able to qualify for the credit because they went in and basically took it down to the studs, put in new insulation, etc.
And Eric, I assume that also includes like anything you would do like with solar panels and things like that too, right?
Yeah, there is a solar component to it as well. So if you do, there's solar has its own kind of set of credits and deductions, but
Yeah.
solar definitely goes into our modeling when we're modeling the efficiency of a building. If
Mhm.
there's solar, it definitely helps our modeling process.
Okay.
So you can see here for the 45L, again, the 45L is a little different than the 179D where you can't go back as far as 2006 because you have to take these credits in the year that you put them into service. So you really only have about a 3-year look back period because we can amend our taxes for up to 3 years back. And so if you've built anything from basically 2001, 2002, 2003, I'm sorry, 2022, 2023, or 2024, you may be able to go back and retroactively claim these credits. But I can't tell you guys how many times we've made this presentation and there's a home builder in the audience who's like, oh, I build 200 homes a year and I've never heard of this. And we've been able to go back and get 200 homes times a $5,000 credit in some cases. That's very substantial. And so just something to keep in mind as you guys are working with clients. It's typically you want to have about 6 units in order for it to financially make sense. Our fees are right around like $300 per unit, so it's very difficult for us to make any money if we're just doing a single family home, for example. So usually 6 units or more is what most companies will do. Some have a higher threshold, but ours is about 6 units or more for it to make sense, or at least for us to look at it and we can see if it qualifies. So both with the 179D and the 45L, we'll always do a free analysis where you send us a set of the plans. We can look at those plans, look at the insulation, the way that it's constructed, and we can give you a good idea if your building may or may not qualify for some of these incentives.
So do you have to be on site, Eric? Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah. So there is a inspection element to this, and it actually the 45L got a little bit more difficult after the Inflation Reduction Act of 2023, and they actually require us to do 2 inspections, one pre-drywall and one after the building is complete. So the pre-drywall inspection is for us to look at the insulation to make sure that it was installed correctly and to make sure that the right insulation was installed via the blueprint. So there's actually 2 inspections on the 45L. The 179D just requires one upon completion of the building. Good questions. I think that's it on the 45L. Again, I could do we actually have a whole presentation on each of these subjects, but I just wanted to bring it to the forefront before we jumped into cost seg, because again, 2 of the most underutilized tax credits and deductions out there. And so for you guys, this is more just, hey, if there's an opportunity, give us a call and let's walk through it together. But I wanted to give you guys an idea of what's out there because unfortunately, like I said, these things go way underutilized and it's kind of a use it or lose it type thing if you don't do it in a certain time frame. So any questions on the 45L before we jump into cost segregation? All right. So let's talk about cost segregation now. So cost segregation really is just accelerated depreciation on your real estate assets. So one of the benefits of owning real estate is the ability to take depreciation against that real estate. So for example, just to make the math easy, office buildings depreciate over 39 years and residential units depreciate over 27 and a half years. So if I buy a $390,000 office condo, essentially I take 390,000, divide it by 39, and I'm going to get a $10,000 write-off every year for the next 39 years, which is great. That's $10,000 off my taxable income. So that lowers my taxable income, which means I pay less tax. It's basically an expense. It's no different than taking a client out to lunch. You get to expense that. Well, this is a non-cash expense. So I don't actually have to come out of pocket and pay for it. I just bought my building and my building has this expense every year. Well, that's great and all, but I may not own my building for 39 years. I want my deductions at a much faster rate. I don't want to take 1/39th of a deduction for the next 39 years. So the way that I'm able to do that is through an engineering-based study where we come in and identify short-term assets within that building. So a short-term asset would be something like carpet, countertops, cabinets, appliances, um, driveways, parking lots, curbs, gutters, asphalt, trees, bushes, and shrubs. Those are even a short life asset. So when you buy a $390,000 office condo, we take that $390,000 purchase price and we break it up or segregate those costs into different buckets, which allows us to depreciate it at a much faster rate. So usually we're taking a 39 or a 27 and a half year asset and we're breaking it up into 5, 7, and 15-year assets, and then a good portion of it stays in that long-term category. But when you do that, you now get to depreciate some of that over 5 years versus 27 and a half or 39 years. So there's a number of reasons why you'd want to do that. There's inflation, a dollar today is worth way more than a dollar in 39 years from now. So give me my deductions today so I can go buy another property, or I can pay down my debt, or I guess you can invest in Bitcoin if people are still investing in Bitcoin. I think they are. So, yes, you can take that money and do what you want with it, right? And so that's the whole idea behind cost segregation, is just taking something that normally gets spread out evenly over 39 years and taking a good chunk of that in the first couple of years and then getting a little bit less in future years when you don't maybe own the asset, etc. So how do we determine what is personal property? So there's really three tests. When we go into a building and we're looking at all the different components of a building, there's three things that we're looking at. One is, can we remove that property without damage to the building or structure? So I'm here in my home office. If I take this carpet up, it's not going to damage the building or structure. If I remove the window covering, I'm not going to damage the building or structure. So those are short life assets. Number two is if the relationship between the asset and equipment or machinery is so close they'd be retired at the same time. So let's say you're in a conference room and there's a TV up on the wall. That TV is a 5-year asset. But not only is that TV a 5-year asset, there's electrical work going to the middle of that wall. The only reason you put a plug in the middle of a wall is specifically for a television. So we can associate that plug to that TV, and now we get to depreciate that electrical work all the way back to the circuit breaker as part of that 5-year asset. So you're not only depreciating the TV over 5 years, you're also depreciating a chunk of the overall electrical work within a building as a short life asset. So when you think about multifamily, for example, how much of the electricity going into a multifamily or even a single family home is specific for short life assets? Things like garbage disposal, ceiling fans, washers, dryers, range hoods. Sometimes it can be as much as 50% of the electrical work going into a building is specific for short-term assets. And so that's a big chunk that we get to take out and now depreciate that over 5 years versus 27 and a half or 39 years. And then the last one here is the relationship between the asset and the nature of the business are unique. In this example, I don't know if anyone knows what mead is or a meadery that produces mead. I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up, but we got called to do a meadery in Phoenix, Arizona. So mead is a fermented honey that they make an alcoholic beverage,
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of beer, wine, or a beer out of.
Irish.
Yeah, it's fermented
Irish
honey.
wine. Yeah.
And so,
hmm
of course, we got called to do the site visit down in August, down in Phoenix, Arizona, when it was 120 degrees. So we're going down there. We go in this warehouse. It's sweltering hot. You go in this warehouse. They have these 50-gallon drums of honey. Well, that honey has to be kept at a certain temperature in order for it to be worked, in order to work with it. It can't be too hot, too cold. So they have HVAC equipment in there that keeps this honey at a certain temperature. Well, normally HVAC equipment to keep you and I comfortable within a building, that's part of the building. You kind of have to have that to have a building. And so that's a long-term asset. But in this case, the HVAC was specific to keep that honey cool, not necessarily the workers cool, but the honey cool. And so we were able to treat that as equipment and depreciate it over a much faster useful life. So that's kind of a unique situation where the business use of that equipment dictates how we get to depreciate that piece of equipment. Here are some commonly segregated items. Over on the right-hand side, these are our 5 and 7-year assets, things like carpet, countertops, cabinets, window covering, specialty plumbing, parts of the lights. Flooring is kind of an interesting one. Flooring can either be a short life asset or it can be a long-term asset. It depends on the type of flooring. So the IRS says that natural hardwood and ceramic tile, those are 27 and a half or 39-year assets. But if you're putting in carpet or LVP, those are short life assets and those get depreciated over 5 years. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at on the inside of a building. Here on the land improvements, we got things like parking lots, curbs, gutters, asphalt, storm drains, irrigation systems, retaining walls. Again, trees, bushes, and shrubs is kind of an interesting one. If we're doing a site visit on an office building, we actually go outside the building and count all the trees, bushes, and shrubs because those are land improvements. And the IRS says that land improvements should be depreciated over 15 years, not 39 or 27 and a half. And then everything else that's left in the building, which is usually about 70%. So we usually segregate about 30% into these short life assets. The 70% stays in this long-term category here. So those are all your structural components: steel structure, roofs, walls, doors, framing, sheetrock. That all stays in that long-term category. But by segregating these short life assets, about 30% of it typically into those categories, again, we're front loading or taking a much bigger deduction at an early year. All right, so that's kind of cost segregation at a high level. There's some bonus or additional benefits that come with cost segregation. One of them is bonus depreciation. That kind of puts cost segregation on steroids, and we'll talk about what it is and how it applies. The next is the ability to do cost segregation on assets that have already been placed in service. So maybe you or a client of yours has a rental property that they bought back in 2022. They've been taking their standard deduction for the last 2 years, and now they want to do cost seg and accelerate those deductions. They can actually do those now without having to go back and amend any of those prior year returns. And we'll kind of walk through an example of how that works. Probably the most complicated thing we'll talk about is recapture upon sale. When you sell an asset, you pay 2 types of tax: capital gains tax and depreciation recapture. And I'm sitting here saying, take all the depreciation you can up front. And sometimes tax preparers will come back and say, Erik, isn't this just a timing issue? If I take all this depreciation up front, I just have a bigger tax bill or capital gains bill when I sell the asset. And the answer is yes, you do have to pay some of it back, but you're paying it back at a lower rate and saving a rate arbitrage spread. So you take your deduction against your ordinary income and pay it back at a capital gains rate of 20%, and you get to save that spread. And we have an example we'll walk through there. And then if we've got time, we'll talk about partial asset dispositions. So here's a case study. This was a retail building purchased for 1.325. You'll see there it says net of land. So land is never depreciable. So whenever you buy a property, whether it's residential or commercial, you always have to back out your land value. So the building itself was 1.325, bought in 2023. The tax year is 2023. We go in, we identify the short life assets, and here's what we come up with. So over here on the left-hand side in this black column, this is your depreciation without cost segregation. So if you don't do cost segregation, you're going to get a $33,000 write-off every year for the next 39 years. Again, that's just taking that 1.325 million, dividing it by 39, and that's a $33,000 write-off every year. Now you'll notice here in year one, it actually says 18. That's because they only owned it for a partial year. But essentially, you're getting a $33,000 write-off every year for the next 39 years. Now, this blue section, this is our cost segregated section. You'll see here we've identified in this example about $145,000 worth of 5-year assets. We've taken that $145,000, we've split it up over 5 years. Again, you actually see 6 years here, but that's because there's a half year on each side. Our 7-year assets, we get split up over 7 years, and then our 15-year assets get split up over 15 years. Over here on the left, you can see we identified about $13,000 worth of 7-year assets and $251,000 worth of 15-year assets. In this example, it comes up to, what is that, 31% here. I said earlier, we usually segregate around 31 or around 30%. In this example, we're at 31%. The other 69% stays in this long-term category of 39 years. But you can see over here, this is my new depreciation amount. So in year one, instead of getting an $18,000 deduction, I'm now getting a $56,000 deduction. In year two, which is my first full year of ownership, I'm getting a $97,000 deduction versus a $33,000 deduction. That's an increase of $63,000. And if you take that deduction of $63,000 and times it by your tax bracket, that's about a $25,000 tax savings. So up here in the summary of benefits, you'll see over the first 5 years, we actually increase our depreciation amount by $194,000. And if you apply your tax bracket, in this case, it was 35% to that, you're getting about a $68,000 tax savings. And you can't see it here, but it's right around here in year 2039, down here at the bottom. You would actually get slightly less deduction. You actually get like 31,000 versus 33,000. Because remember, we're just front loading it. So at some point, there's going to be a time where we actually get less than we would have had we not done cost seg. But I'm okay with that because I may not own my building in 2037. And I've had all this tax savings, this cash flow, this money to be able to, again, go pay down my debt, go buy another property, do what I want with that money. So that's
I have
kind
a
of
question,
yeah,
Erik. Okay, so let's say I didn't do cost seg and I
sure.
bought this building and I was just doing depreciation without it. Okay.
Okay.
And then in year 10, I decide to have a cost segregation study done. Do you know where I'm going with this? Okay. So my question is, then can I bulk everything that I didn't take because now I have a cost segregation study? I've missed out on all of my 5-year, all of my 7-year, and 10 years of my 15-year. Can I take that as a bulk chunk write-off at one time?
Yes, and you can actually do it without amending. And I have an example here.
Okay.
I think it's in 2 or 3 slides. So, but yes, the answer is yes, you definitely can. And that's a great opportunity to create a massive tax deduction in a year. And the thing is you don't do that until you have a high taxable year. And
Right.
you do it in that year so that
Okay.
you are in a higher tax bracket, which means these deductions are worth more.
Then my next question is, can you tell I do my own taxes?
No,
My next question is, if I didn't want to take that whole amount, can I spread it out over a few years?
yes,
or do I have to take it in that year?
Yes and no. There are a couple levers, which I'll talk about here in a second, that you can turn on and off that allow you to kind of manage your tax bracket, but
Okay.
you can't necessarily say, hey, I need $50,000 deduction this year. I'm going to use 50,000 this year and let the rest ride forward.
Yeah.
But I'll show you how you can kind of manage those tax brackets. It's actually here on I think the next slide.
Okay. I was just curious about that because I thought if you could take a
question.
bulk, that would be like fantastic for especially some people who aren't taking things, right? Taking
Yeah, no, you got it.
deductions.
That's a great question. So I think we'll answer it in more depth here in just a second. Let me go to the next slide here. Whoops. Maybe. Let's see. Hold on. It's wanting me to use, I don't want to use the pin. There we go. All right. So let's talk a little bit about bonus depreciation. And this is one of the tools you can use to manage your tax brackets or manage those deductions. So the IRS has bonus depreciation has been around for a number of years. The government uses bonus depreciation to stimulate the economy. So when the economy is not doing well, they'll increase the amount of bonus depreciation. When the economy is doing well, they'll decrease the amount of bonus depreciation. Let's back up to 2017. At the time, bonus depreciation was at 50%, and it only applied to brand new property that had a useful life of 20 years or less. So I think when they actually came up with bonus, they're like, hey, we don't want this to apply to real estate. So we're going to make the asset has to have a useful life of 20 years or less. Because remember, real estate's 27 and a half or 39 years. So typically a lot of CPAs are like, well, bonus depreciation doesn't apply to real estate. And I'll show you why that's not the case here in a second. But 2017, bonus depreciation was only eligible for assets that were brand new and had a useful life of 20 years or less, and that bonus depreciation was at 50%. So an example would be you go out and buy $1 million brand new bulldozer right off the factory line. You would get a $500,000 write-off in year one, 50%. The other 500,000 gets spread out over the useful life of that bulldozer. Fast forward to the end of 2017, Donald Trump is our president. Donald Trump owns real estate, and Donald Trump revised the tax code. And in doing so, it was very favorable to to real estate investors. So a couple things changed. Two big changes. One is the first one you see here, bonus went from 50% to 100%. So now in that example of the bulldozer, if I bought $1 million bulldozer, I would get, instead of spreading that out over the useful life of a bulldozer, let's call it 20 years, instead of spreading out my deductions over 20 years, I now get 100% of that $1 million deduction all in year one, which is great. You know, if you're in a 37% tax bracket, you just save $370,000 in year one, which is amazing. That's the first big change. The second thing, which I think was more important, is they added 5 or 6 words to the tax code that I don't think anybody in Congress who voted on the bill even knew they were adding those words to the tax code. But they added the words "new to you, the taxpayer." So now I don't have to go buy a brand new bulldozer. I can go buy a used bulldozer. It's new to me, the taxpayer. And now all of a sudden I'm eligible for bonus depreciation. So you'll see here, bonus depreciation does start to phase out. It was 80% in last year. This year it's 60%. Next year it's scheduled to be 40%. And then eventually it phases out down here in 2027 when it's at 0. Now, there was a bill put in front of Congress earlier this year to extend the 100% bonus through 2025. Got to the House, passed the House almost unanimously. It had bipartisan support. Then it got to the Senate. The Senate said, yeah, we're not going to pass this in an election year. You're going to have to wait till after this presidential election. So they kind of killed the bill. This is just my take on it. Don't quote me on this. This is just from the research I've done. I think what's going to happen, we have the presidential election coming up here in a few days. Regardless of who wins that election, Congress will get back together at the end of this year, beginning of next year. They'll put together a comprehensive tax bill. The nice thing about this bonus depreciation is it expires at the same time as the child tax credits. So the Democrats have the child tax credits that are set to expire. The Republicans have this bonus depreciation that's set to expire. And what they did in the House, which I assume they'll do in the Senate as well, is they're going to say, hey, we'll give you your child tax credits, but we want our bonus depreciation. Probably be one of the few things that Congress will agree on in the next 3 years. But I'm hoping they do, because that is great for all of us real estate investors, because if they can extend the 100% bonus, it's huge for us. So let's look at that same retail center, but now let's apply the bonus. So we still have our $145,000 worth of 5-year assets.
Now, Erik, just a quick question again. Sorry to keep interrupting.
You're good.
While I have the question.
Yeah.
So, but none of this means a hill of beans, and none of this is any kind of a deduction unless you are actively, unless you are active in real estate. Like you can't be a passive investor. It's not going to allow you to take any of these deductions if you're passive.
Correct. That is a great point. So these deductions that we create when we're doing our cost seg study, for the average American, these are considered passive deductions, and these can only be used to offset passive income. So let's say I make $100,000 at my day job. I make $20,000 on my rental properties. This deduction that I create with this cost seg study can only be used to offset my rental income. Now, the caveat to that is you guys, most of you on this call, I would imagine, do real estate for a living, and you're classified as a real estate professional for tax purposes, which is kind of like the golden ticket, if you ask me, because now you can say, hey, I do real estate for a living. Yes, I've got my properties on the side, but this is also what I do for a living. So when we create these deductions for you guys, these deductions are considered active, and they can be used to offset not only your rental income, but also your active income. And if you're married and file jointly, they can be used to offset your spouse's W-2 income. So that's why real estate professional status is key to have. So for all of you guys, if you're not already aware of it, make sure you guys are filing your taxes as a real estate professional. The requirements for that are you've got to spend 750 hours a year doing real estate, which if you're working 40 hours a week, you're going to blow that number out of the water. That's the easy test. The harder test is you have to spend 51% of your working time doing real estate. So if you have a full-time job as a doctor, even if you get your 750 hours in a year doing real estate, you've got to spend more time doing real estate than you do as a doctor. And so that's why it doesn't always work. So a lot of time, like high W-2 earners, like doctors and lawyers, oftentimes their spouse is fortunate enough to stay home. They'll have their spouse manage their rental properties. The spouse spends more time doing real estate than anything else. The spouse documents their 750 hours of real estate activity. The spouse becomes the real estate professional, and now I can use these deductions to offset my doctor income. So that is a good point that you brought up. You want to make sure that we're offsetting active income needs active deductions, passive income needs passive deductions. So these deductions can be either, it depends on the other facts within your tax return. So back to the bonus here. This is showing this with 80% bonus. You can see we're getting 80% of that 145 all here in the first year. We're getting 80% of our 7-year assets, 80% of our 15-year assets, all in year one. And look at our year one deduction now when we apply 80% bonus. You're getting a $350,000 write-off versus an $18,000 write-off.
Hi, I just want to take a moment to thank you for watching a recording of the Monday Night Live class. Hope you're getting a lot out of it. I'm sure you will. I wanted to let you know that, you can come to Monday Night Live whenever you want, but you can also participate more with the team. Why don't you set up a call with me, a one-on-one strategy call? I can go over everything with you, show you everything that we have to offer. For example, did you know that on our team, not only do you get your leads, we actually give you your own account on our lead gen system. So this puts you in control. You're not waiting on somebody to hand you leads. You get to pick the ones you want. Okay. Huge difference. We have 21 of our own proprietary marketing campaigns. They're all copyright protected. We're the only ones that can use them. Okay. The coaching is absolutely one-on-one. We got 3 coaches. We even have a 4th success coach that we have access to. Okay. One of left fewer than 100 in the world. Okay. One-on-one coaching. Right now the big problem is volume. We need more transactions. We need more inventory. I get it. Well, we know how to get it. Our team actually outproduces the national average by more than 2 to 1. So if you're struggling, don't do that anymore. If you're a solo agent, if you're a team, let's just talk. Smart entrepreneurs are always open to discussion. Learn what we have to offer, and then you can make an informed decision about staying where you are or moving on. You've got to decide, if you're not where you want to be, you've got to take action to get where you want to be. Let's see how we can help you do that. I look forward to talking to you. Click on the link, set up a call. And by the way, I'll see you on the next Monday Night Live.
So that's an increase of 331,000, which means that is a tax savings of 132. So now back to your question, Karen, about can you pick and choose how much deduction you need? The answer is no, you can't pick and say, I need X amount of deduction. But what you can do is the IRS allows you to opt out of bonus by class life. So what some investors, if they don't need a $350,000 deduction, they will say, hey, I'm not going to take bonus on my 5-year assets. So we're going to spread this out more evenly over 5 years, but I am going to take bonus on my 15. Or I might take bonus on my 15 and 7, but not on my 5. So you can kind of manage it a little bit. There are some levers where you can decide and dictate how much of a deduction you get, but you can't explicitly go in and say, hey, I need X amount. I'm going to push everything forward. The nice thing is if you do get a $350,000 deduction, and let's say you've only got $250,000 of income, that $100,000 just carries forward, and you get to use it against your first $100,000 of income next year. So, anyways, that's bonus depreciation. Like I said, it really just puts cost segregation on steroids. It's a very powerful tool to be able to reduce your tax liability. So, There's one other thing I do want to bring up there. I don't know how many of you guys get into selling short-term rental properties, but back to Karen's point, if I'm a W-2 employee, which I am, my wife is a W-2 employee. She works at the school district. So her and I don't qualify for real estate professional status. So I'll give you a true life story. At the end of 22, we had a large tax bill. It was a good year for cost seg, bonus depreciation came around. Everyone was doing cost seg. We had a good year financially, and we had a tax liability. I have a long-term rental that I own, but if I do cost seg on that long-term rental, I can't use those deductions to offset my W-2 income because those are considered passive deductions, and I need active deductions to offset my active income. So what I did was I took advantage of what is called the short-term rental loophole. I hate to use the word loophole because it sounds like you're doing something nefarious, but I wasn't. It's actually in the tax code, but I went out at the end of the year and I bought a Airbnb type property. So when you buy or manage an Airbnb or short-term rental, as long as the average stay is less than 7 days, and I can show what they call material participation in the management of that property. So there's 7 tests that you only have to meet one of the 7 tests. But basically what happens on short-term rentals is the IRS, if the average stay is less than 7 days, the IRS, they don't look at it as a rental property. They look at it as a hotel or what they call a transient property. That has a whole different set of rules than a long-term rental. A transient property or a hotel, for example, if I manage my hotel or if I manage my Airbnb, I'm actively involved in that business. And therefore, the deductions from that Airbnb can be used to offset my active income.
There's your loophole.
Yes, major loophole. If you guys Google short-term rental loophole, there's thousands of podcasts and demonstrations on how it's done, but it's actually stood up in court. You've got to make sure you're documenting your hours. You got to make sure you're meeting one of those 7 tests. The test that I met was fairly easy to meet. I had to spend 100 hours at the property before the end of the year. So I was strategic and I bought my property at the end of fall, spent my 100 hours there getting it ready to make it an Airbnb. That's the first test. You have to spend 100 hours and I had to spend more time there than anybody else managing that property. So I was there because I bought it at the end of the year. I was there more than our cleaner. I was there more than the maintenance folks, more than the property management people. I did my 100 hours. So I qualified for that to be active in the year 2022. 2023 rolls around. I decide I don't want to manage that property anymore. So I turn it over to a management group, but I'm okay with that because I've already got my deduction. In the year that I created that deduction, I was actively managing it. And so I could use that deduction to offset, in that case, in my case, it was $140,000 of active income between my wife and I that we didn't have to pay tax on that year. So you take 140,000 times a 32% tax bracket, that's about a $50,000 tax savings. So my down payment on that property was about 80,000. So I put down 80, but I got 50 of it back. And now I have a revenue generating property. And quite frankly, the property about breaks even. I make a little bit of money off the property, but I'm okay with that because I wanted it for the tax savings and I wanted it for the appreciation over time. You got to make sure you want to the property. And there's a famous saying, don't let the tax tail wag the dog. I think that's how it goes. I might have butchered that. You don't always want to make decisions just based solely on tax consequences. You've got to want to manage a property. You got to make sure it's in a good area, all that other stuff. But something to think about.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Erik.
What's up? Go ahead.
If you don't mind me asking, in the examples, I noticed you're choosing a 39-year depreciation. And I guess first of all, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like there was a push several years ago for the IRS to get away from 39-year and have everybody move to 27.5 year. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe I don't know where even I heard that, but are you locked into 39 years with commercial, or can you choose 27.5?
No, you are locked into 39 years for commercial, 27.5 for residential. And so residential in the tax world is anywhere where somebody lives. So sometimes in the real estate world, a big apartment building is considered commercial. But in the tax world, if somebody's living there, that's considered residential. And so it gets a 27.5 year treatment. Commercial would be your office buildings, retail, medical space, restaurants. Those are all 39-year assets. If you think about it, anywhere that's open from 9 to 5, basically, that gets a lot less wear and tear on it than a place where somebody could eventually or essentially stay there 24/7. So a residential unit
Gotcha.
that you live in gets depreciated faster, gets more use, more wear and tear than a building where it's only open 9 to 5. And so I think that's the rationale behind it. But yeah, anywhere where somebody lives is 27.5. Anything else is 39. So
That makes sense because we've of course in real estate brokerage anything 5 units and above is considered commercial even if it's lived in. But the distinguishing factor is one of them people are living in there and the other one people are not living in there. And that's the
yeah,
difference. Yeah. So
that's the difference there.
okay.
So all right, let's talk a little bit about catch up. This goes back to your other question, Karen, about, hey, if I've owned the property for 10 years, never done cost seg, I find myself this year, I've got a big tax bill, I need some deductions. Can I go back and do cost seg on that property I've owned in the past? The answer is yes. It does require an extra form. You'll see down here it says Form 3115. This is a change in accounting method. And basically, we're telling the IRS, hey, I'm changing the way I'm accounting my property. I've been taking my standard deduction for the last 10 years. I'm now going to accelerate that deduction. And here's the difference in those numbers. It's actually kind of interesting. On that Form 3115, we're checking a box that says you're going from an impermissible method of depreciation to a permissible method. So you're saying, hey, IRS, I screwed up. I was depreciating my carpet over 27.5 years. I should have been depreciating my carpet over 5 years. And here's the difference in those numbers. Now, it's actually the correct way to depreciate things. The IRS is never going to come after you, Karen, and be like, hey, you've been taking the standard straight line. We owe you more money. Here's the extra money. They're not going to do that. It's just more money for them. But if you actually read the tax code, you're doing it incorrectly. If you go buy a residential rental and you depreciate that whole thing over 39 years without breaking it up, you're actually doing it incorrect according to the IRS. It's just that a lot of our tax preparers don't have the ability to go in and segregate everything into different buckets. They don't know how to put values to those. So they just say, hey, we're just going to depreciate this building, this whole lump sum over 27.5. So these numbers are very small here. You guys may be able to see them on your screen if you blow them up, but this is the $1.3 million building, but we're now saying it went into service on 6/1 of 2015. So it's now been in service for 7-8 years. You see here, when we did the cost seg study, we determined that we were eligible for $437,000 of deduction over those 7 years. By doing straight line depreciation, we only took $218,000 of depreciation. So the difference between the 437 and the 218 just so happens to be an additional 218 in this example. So this 218 is what they call a 481A adjustment. You'll see that here at the top of the column. So we're making a 481A adjustment on our tax return saying, hey, again, IRS, I screwed up. I've understated my depreciation over the last 10 years by $218,000. I want to catch that up now on this current tax return. Here's the form. And you don't have to amend the prior year. So very powerful stuff.
I need to get good at it.
I don't recommend it.
Hang on 1 second. Erik, help me find that.
Oh yeah, I think I don't know if somebody's microphone's on. I think they might have turned it off. So I think we're good.
I think we got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So that's what we call catch up or look back studies. As far as let's talk a little bit about the sell of an asset, because I think this is again probably the most important thing, very important for you guys as well, as real estate brokers and agents for you guys. But when you sell an asset, you pay two types of tax. You pay capital gains tax and you pay depreciation recapture. And again, I'm sitting here telling you to front load, take all the depreciation you can. And then sometimes we get pushback and say, Erik, this is just a timing issue. If I take all this depreciation now, I'm going to have a bigger capital gains bill when I sell it. And the answer is yes, you will have a bigger capital gains bill, but it's going to be at a lower rate than what you're taking your deduction at. So you're saving the spread. So again, take your deduction. So if I'm in a 37% tax bracket today, and let's say I do a cost seg study and it creates a $100,000 deduction. So if I have a $100,000 deduction, I'm in a 37% tax bracket. I just saved $37,000 on my taxes. When I sell this building in 5 years, if I have to pay that $100,000 of deduction back at a 20% capital gains rate, that means I'm paying back $20,000. So I'm saving $37,000 today, keeping that money for 5 years, and then in 5 years I'm paying back $20,000 of it in recapture, and I'm saving the spread. And it's even better than that. That's like worst case scenario where you pay it all back. Best case scenario, you pay some of it back. And I'm going to back into this example because I think it makes more sense. So let's say you buy a building today for $300,000. You sell it 5 years later for $600,000. In that example, you're telling the IRS that everything is doubled in value. I bought this house, this rental house, and all the stuff in it for $300,000. I'm selling this rental house and all the stuff in it for $600,000, and they're going to charge you on that $300,000 of gain. They're going to charge you tax on that. Well, my walls went up in value, my land went up in value, but certainly my dirty old stained carpet is not worth double what I bought it for 5 years ago. My appliances are not worth double what I bought them for 5 years ago. So remember, carpet and appliances are both 5-year assets. What is the book value of my carpet after owning it for 5 years? Zero. Has zero value. It's fully depreciated. It's down to zero. So why am I selling my carpet? So let's say when I bought this house, I did a cost seg study and they said this carpet in this house is worth $20,000. When I go sell my house, I'm selling my carpet for $40,000 and paying tax on that gain. When I should be selling my carpet for zero because that's got zero book value. It's 5 years old, it's stained, it's dirty. I should be selling it for zero. So here's an example here. There's a lot of numbers here, you guys. This took me like 3 weeks to even figure out what the hell I was trying to look at here. So I don't expect you guys to figure it out in the next 3 minutes. But the idea here is I bought that. This is that same retail building. I bought it for $135,000. Remember, we had $145,000 worth of 5-year assets, $13,000 worth of 7-year, and $251,000 worth of 15-year. So I just broke it up into the different categories. When I sell this asset, in this example, I'm selling it for $2 million 7 years later. So I bought it for 1.3. I'm selling it for 2 7 years later. I don't show the math here with the recapture and the capital gains, but if you don't do a cost seg, your tax bill is going to be around $198,000. So your property went up $675,000 worth of value. You settle with the IRS, they're going to send you a bill for $198,000. That's without cost seg. When I do cost seg, what are my 5-year assets worth after owning them for 7 years? I've taken all the depreciation. They have zero book value.
Nothing.
Right. My 7-year assets, I've taken all the depreciation. They have zero book value. My 15-year assets, I've taken about half of the depreciation because I've owned it for 7 years. So they have some book value. When all these numbers flush out and I pay my capital gains and I pay my depreciation recapture, my total tax bill upon sale is now $164,593, which means I just created a permanent tax savings of $34,109. And in this example, the way I've shown the math here is this is as if I did the cost seg study in the year I sold the building. So I didn't even do it in year one. I didn't include the time value of money. I didn't include present value money factors like, hey, if I took that $50,000 of tax savings and invested it at 7%, the money I'd make off that. All I did was say, hey, if I do the cost seg study right before I sell the building, so I bought it 7 years ago, I'm getting ready to sell. I come to my agent says, hey, have you done a cost seg study on that building? I say, no. They might have just saved me $34,000 in taxes by simply doing the cost seg before I sold the building. The reason for that is I now can allocate my sales price, this $2 million, to these different buckets. I can allocate it to my 5-year bucket, which in this case, we were conservative. I could have put 0 here. I allocated 10%. I said my carpet and appliances are worth something. So I allocated a small amount, but basically all this gain gets shifted over here into the capital gains bucket. and I end up paying 20% on it when I took the deduction at 37. So that's an important example. Again, probably the most complicated thing we'll learn today. But if you guys don't remember anything from this slide other than don't sell your dirty, nasty carpet for more than you bought it for, and then call Erik and I'll help walk through it and we'll see if it makes sense for your client. But that's the idea here.
Erik,
Yeah.
would it not make sense?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Would it then it basically makes sense as long as you're selling it down the road, like a quick turnover sale that's not as profitable. I mean, would not make sense. Obviously, it needs time to ripen, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that you can offset the gain.
Yeah, the longer you hold the property, the bigger your tax savings will be over time.
Yeah.
But there are instances, it's only on the really large properties. Like if you have, I've kind of run the math on it. If you've got $1 million property, even if you only hold it for 1 year, it's still going to come out saving a few $1,000s in taxes because you're taking your deduction at your ordinary income, paying most of it back at that same rate, but some of it's going to get paid back at 20% and you're saving the spread. So
yeah, I figured it would be pretty small, if you had like $1 million or something.
Yeah. The larger the property, it gets bigger and bigger. Like a $10 million property, just add an extra zero to your tax savings. But you're right. For the smaller properties, you've got to own it for some period of time, usually 3 to 5 years before it starts to make sense in a sold situation. So the longer you hold the property, if you're buying $300,000 homes, fixing them up and turn around and selling them a year later, cost segregation is probably not. You probably want to do that with some of your homes and then buy a home and hold it. Do the cost seg from this home to offset all the money you're making over here. But numbers of different strategies you can utilize there.
Okay.
Good questions. All right, we've just got a couple slides left. How are we doing on time, Gary? We good on time?
Yeah, we're good. Yep.
Okay. I just need about 5 more minutes. I want to talk about these partial asset dispositions because this is something we've seen done. This is something we see done incorrectly all the time. So you buy a building, you buy it for $300,000, and then a year later you put a $50,000 roof on that building. What should happen, and what does happen when you do a cost seg study, is when you buy that $350,000 home, we line item all the different components of that building. One of those line items is roof. So we say, okay, you paid $350 for the building, your roof was worth $30,000. Roof is a 27.5-year asset. So when I replace the roof the following year, I have this 27.5-year asset that I've only used 1 year's worth of depreciation on. I've only depreciated a little bit of it because I've only owned it for 1 year. So it's got almost all of its book value left. When I go put my new roof on my depreciation schedule, I go buy a new roof, I put it on my depreciation schedule. What should happen is I should pull that old roof off my depreciation schedule because I'm no longer using it for a business use. It's gone. I'm retiring that piece of equipment. Pull that old roof off, expense it in the current year, and pay no recapture on it. So if my remaining book value on that old roof is $25,000, I get a $25,000 deduction when I dispose of that roof because it's no longer in service. Now, what we see done incorrectly all too often is on the depreciation schedule, it'll say building $350,000, and then underneath that, a year later, they add a line that says roof $40,000. What's happening in that scenario is I'm depreciating 2 roofs at the same time. I've got that old roof that's stuck in that line item that says building, and now I'm depreciating my new roof. So now I'm double depreciating a roof, which means I'm taking too much depreciation, which means when I go sell it, I actually am artificially inflating my recapture tax. What should happen is you pull that old roof off, dispose of it, get a $25,000 write-off in the year you put a new roof on, pay no recapture tax, and then you start depreciating the new roof. So again, just one of the added benefits. This can actually be done without cost seg. Some savvy CPAs, tax preparers will do this by looking at different tables and stuff, but it's certainly a lot easier when you have everything line itemed on your depreciation schedule. As you replace the cabinets, as you replace the roof, you put in a new parking lot, just take the old one off, get a write-off, put the new one on, and go along your way. So something to be aware of. All right. So couple more things. One last thing I want to talk about actually is this audit guide. So the IRS, as you guys may or may not know, the IRS got a huge influx of money. They hired a bunch of new agents and they revised the audit guide on how they audit these cost seg studies. So keep in mind, cost segregation in and of itself does not raise the audit flag. We've done 25,000 studies. We've been involved in just over 24 audits now. Not a single audit was caused by a cost seg study, but they've something else in your tax return flags an audit. They're going to say, hey, I see you've done a cost seg study. Let's see the report to see how you came up with these numbers. At that point, you just provide them the report. Usually they go away for the most part. Interestingly enough, there's 6 methods to do cost seg in this audit guide. So this is something that you guys can go out and you just Google cost segregation audit guide. You'll find it on the IRS website. And it says these are the preferred ways to do cost seg. 1 and 2, which I've highlighted here, are a detailed engineering approach using actual cost. So that would be you build a brand new building, you've got a list of invoices. That's pretty straightforward. Number 2 is a detailed engineering cost estimate approach, meaning you buy an existing building. You obviously don't have the invoices for all the stuff when this building was built a long time ago. So we go in and we estimate the cost of those items. I wanted you to skip down to number 6 here, which says rule of thumb approach. This approach, or no, it says rule of thumb approach. An examiner should view this approach with caution since it lacks sufficient documentation to support the allocation of project costs. This is like perfect IRS 101 for you. They're telling you these are the preferred methods. You guys are a smart group. Is number 6 preferred or not? It's on the list of preferred methods, but then they tell you don't do it this way in the same damn paragraph. So the reason I bring this to your attention is there are some softwares out there that fall in this rule of thumb approach. Basically, it's kind of like the TurboTax of our industry where you go in, you put in some information on your property, it'll spit out a report, you pay the $700, it gives you a report. 2 things with those reports. One is they're very, very conservative because they're using a modeling approach. They're saying, on average, homes in Georgia, they typically have X amount of carpet if it's a 3x2. And so they're just using a very conservative modeling approach. They're not actually going in and looking at the carpet, measuring the carpet to see how much carpet is there. They're just taking a modeling approach. And because they're not going in and measuring the carpet, they take a very conservative stance on what they're including in their report. So the reason I bring this to your attention is, yes, they are less expensive than these first 2 engineering-based approaches, but the deduction that you get is substantially less. So remember when I said we usually find around 30% segregation, in the modeling approaches that I've seen anywhere from 12 to 18% segregation. That additional worst case 12% deduction on a $300,000 home, that's $36,000 of additional depreciation. If you're in a 30% tax bracket, that's about an $11,000 difference in tax savings. So yeah, you saved like an engineering-based study on a single family rental is probably going to cost you around $2,800 to $3,000. These studies will probably cost you $700 to $1,000. So you save $2,000, but you also leave $9,000 of tax savings on the table, number 1. Number 2, if in the rare instance you're ever audited, they will throw this out 100% of the time and say, hey, if you want to use your numbers, you got to go pay for one of these studies. So again, it's kind of like the TurboTax of our industry. There is a time and place for it. If you're buying $60,000 homes, it doesn't make sense to pay for a $2,800 study that's only going to get you $2,800 in tax savings because now we're just at a wash. But if you're buying homes anywhere above $250,000 worth of basis, you definitely want to hit it with an engineering approach versus this rule of thumb approach because your tax savings is going to be substantially larger. With that, I think that's actually everything that I wanted to cover. Just a few things for you guys is we always do an engineering-based study, and we always do an estimate up front. So whether it's on the energy stuff we talked about first or the cost segregation, if you or your clients have a property that they think is eligible for cost seg, we certainly want to get the address, we want to get the purchase price from them, and we'll run that analysis. Usually takes about 24 to 48 hours. We'll run that analysis for them and let them know what the expected tax savings would be, as well as what our fee would be And then they can take that document, or we call it a benefit analysis. They can take that to their tax preparer to determine if they can actually use it and what the savings would be for them. But with that, please use this as a resource, guys. Here's our contact information. That's our website. My contact information, my email, my phone number can be found on that website. We're kind of a niche accounting firm. Don't send me questions about earned business income and child tax credits because I don't know anything about that stuff. If it's real estate related or depreciation related, I think the weirdest question I've been asked is how to depreciate mule deer at a breeding facility in Wisconsin. And I didn't know the answer, but our CPAs at our office were able to get them the answers. So please use this as a resource, guys. We love to help investors out. We love to help agents out any way we can. If you've got clients who are looking at properties and they're like, hey, I might want to buy this as an investment property, and you want us to run some preliminary numbers so that you can give it to them even before they close on it, so they can kind of work that into their pro forma, we're happy to do that as well. So again, please use this as a resource. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Erik.
Erik, is this the information here on the screen? Is that the same information that Sugar has for you, like email, phone number?
This is our general number. I think she probably has my direct number. You guys are more than welcome to reach out to me directly. That 800 number just goes to our office, our corporate office. And so someone always answers your phone. I try to answer my phone as much as I can when I'm not traveling for work. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly or to the 800 number if you can't get a hold of me. Either one works.
Well, reason I'm asking is Sugar's going to send an email out tomorrow with this recording. And ultimately it goes to about 11,000 people directly. And then we also put it on YouTube, it's on Facebook Live now, but Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as shorts and reels on TikTok and Instagram. So what we like to do is give them the video and then give them, hey, contact Erik. And this is, I mean, because guaranteed, I bet my next pay, most investors do not do cost segregation. It's only after they've been at it for a while and somebody finally says something and they're like, what's that? Like I did. And I think because ultimately we reach, I mean, it's a lot, like 70,000 something people, I think, all in. So I just want to make sure we have the right.
Yeah, feel free to put my information out there. Since I'm the one that they're hearing my voice, I'd love for them to call me directly. That's fine. I'm totally okay with that. Yep.
I'll make sure she knows that. So, hey guys, listen, clearly you've got a pretty good feature here tonight. If you have questions, I mean, don't let the opportunity slip by. This is your opportunity. Think about the clients you have now. I don't know if Juwan Bond's on, but she's got somebody looking to sell the multifamily, several of them, and parlay that into other bigger properties. So I'll make sure Juwan gets this recording. But some of you have active projects you're working on. You might want to think about them. Yeah. So I'll keep no questions yet. But and Erik, you're welcome to say I generally still on a few extra minutes, 10, 15 minutes. People will bring up all kinds of stuff we can talk about. But if you're welcome to stick around, sometimes questions.
All of my questions.
That'd be okay. Karen's very quiet. She never does this. No, just kidding. Karen's very smart. She's got a lot of background, business ownership and development, as well as real estate. So this is right up her alley,
Well, I have a question actually, if there's time. So absolutely. For somebody who is looking to get started in essentially building and investing in, let's just say, as an example, multifamily for rental purposes. What would be, I guess, the first steps to, I guess, leveraging money that you don't have? Because I do run into a lot of people that, they're ambitious. They maybe have, a couple grand, maybe tens of thousands to throw at a problem, but they're not entirely sure where to start other than just find a loan. So I was wondering from somebody who's actually done it before and from a business standpoint instead of just buying one property. What would you suggest to somebody for the best first steps?
Are you directing that towards me, James? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes.
Okay, no problem. So I think one is there's all kinds of creative house hacking ways to get into real estate. One way that I like or that I've seen a lot of investors do is when you are buying your first property, if somehow you can get into some kind of duplex, or maybe it's a home where there's an ADU in the basement, or you can rent out the basement. That's an easy way to get in. You might have less space when you first get in because you're renting out your basement. But as you start to build your portfolio up, as you start to save money, let the renters downstairs pay for your mortgage. And while you start saving your money, that eventually you can move out of your unit. And now you've got two units in that duplex. And so that's one way that we see. Um, Leveraging is key with in the cost segregation world, because if I have $100,000 to spend, if I go put 20% down and I go buy a $500,000 property, when I do the cost segregation, I'm going to base my results on the $500,000 purchase price, not the 100,000 I spent. Versus if I take that same 100,000 and I go pay cash for a $100,000 property, which I don't even know where you'd find one of those these days, but if you can find one, and I spend all my cash on it, I now get to only depreciate $100,000 worth of assets versus 500,000. So from strictly a tax perspective, now you've got to be able to qualify and leverage and all that other stuff, but from a tax perspective, leverage is key. Let the bank's money do the work, and go out and buy two or three properties with that same amount of money versus just putting it off and paying cash for one. So those are just a couple ways that I can think of. I'm sure maybe others in the group have investing stories or journeys that they've been on, but that's just ways that I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And then James, I mean, definitely keep coming to class. I mean, it's open to the public. There's no, we're not selling anything. We're
Absolutely.
not recruiting anybody. Yeah, just
I'm
because,
trying to recruit some people too.
oh, but there's people on here actively invest. I mean, I used to invest actively. I'm sort of, I don't call it retirement, but I play a different role these days. But lots of material. You can go to the websites, go to the YouTube channel. We've got almost 1,000 videos on our YouTube channel now, you know. So tons of information. Our philosophy on this team is this, there's four factors in success. And first one is the formula is three things. The formula is the right education, number one, plus the right information, number two. And if you notice tonight, you know, Eric Oliver did a beautiful, amazing job of leading with education, providing information, right? The third step is you taking action, the right action, and equals results. So don't ever rush things or push things. Too many investors do that. They get hasty. They borrow from hard money lenders. I'm not knocking hard money lenders. I'm just telling you, it's called hard for a reason. And our team exists because I want everybody on this team to invest, and I want them to leverage a real estate license to generate revenue consistently in the way of helping other investors. So number one, we're following Zig Ziglar's philosophy, which is simply helping enough other people get what they want, and you're going to be plenty of what you want. And if they're both real estate, it's even better. And it immerses you in the game of real estate investing. And one day you're going to wake up and realize you can take down that deal. It's a beautiful day, but it's conservative, but it works. It prevents you from going into massive debt. I've seen a lot of investors fail because they were completely in debt up to past their eyeballs. And then when something bad happens, you got nothing to fall back. You need a solid foundation to build a solid business model. And when you're leveraged up to your eyeballs, that's not a solid foundation. That's risk. If something happens and somebody calls in a note, did you know that commercial lenders, when one commercial lender calls in a note, the other lenders are notified and it starts snowballing. That's what happened to Dave Ramsey back right before the last recession. He got in a commercial, went too heavy, too fast, too hard, and one lender said it wasn't even his fault. The lender needed the money. They started calling in notes, or at least want the lowest, interest rate loans that they had out there. They called in one of his notes, and all of a sudden other lenders started calling in notes. Then the recession hit, it was game over, declared bankruptcy. So my philosophy is this: lead with a solid foundation. Go in. I know everybody's going to tell you, don't use your own money. And I'm not going to argue with them, although I can, but I'm telling you, when you go in with somebody for your own money, everybody pays more attention to you because they know you've got skin in the game. When you have skin in the game and the proverbial poop hits the fan, you're less likely to jump overboard and say, the hell with it, I'm out of here. You're going to stick with it because you got skin in the game. And the lenders know this, right? And that's why they like lending to people that come to the table with some money, give you better interest rates, better loan terms, solid foundation, more cash flow. It's easier to get the next one, then it's easier the next one. Next thing you know, 10 properties later, you've got a line of credit across your equity on your portfolio. You can go out and then pay cash, but you're your banker. So I'm sorry, I know it sounds like I'm preaching, but I'm just telling you, I've seen it. I've taught over 24,000 people in 22 years, either how to invest or how to work with investors. I've seen it thousands of times, the same pattern over and over again. And they're always in debt. They never get ahead. Very, very few do. The few that they put up on the pedestal, it's like 1 in 1,000. So in any case, that's just my preaching moment for tonight. What do I know?
I had good information. That's great information.
Yeah. So great
I appreciate
question,
it.
James. You know what? It all starts with questions. And you did the right thing, man. You came to the right class. You started asking questions. That's how it all starts. Gather information, you know? So, okay. Any other questions, guys? Hey, how about a big pat on the back for Erik Oliver? That dude, man, Erik, you brought the fire tonight. That was a lot of solid information. You were well prepared, well presented. I mean, these guys can go out to their clients now and they know who to recommend. So, yeah.
Thanks,
No, I
Erik.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's hard to bring the fire when you're talking about tax. So that's an ultimate compliment.
Numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you
There you
guys.
go.
Thank you guys for jumping on and doing tax in the afternoon after a long day's work as well. So education is key. I appreciate it.
It was good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Okay.
Have a good
You
night.
too, Erik.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And everybody, thanks for participating, particularly the guest students. Michelle, it's nice to see you. See if I know there's some people already logged off here. But in any case, I appreciate you guys coming on and joining up. James, good to see you too. So come again anytime you want. And for everybody on the team, please make sure you set up your strategy calls. We got some good things going on. Some students on the team, new agents, are starting to crush it. Carla Canole is one of them up in Massachusetts. Got 2 transactions under contract right now. And I mean, they're $5 and almost $800,000 each. And guess what she did? And the NAR rules. I see a lot of agents pulling back and thinking, man, I should just go for 3%. I better just keep it conservative. I better not be too greedy. Nonsense. She got 7% on the listing side and 3 on the buyer side from her sellers. Okay. I'm telling you, the rules only make you make less money if you interpret them that way and use them that way. But if you think about what the world's going through and the competition, the other agents, the way they're thinking, you have a tremendous asset on your side. You got a tremendous advantage. You can show them tools like ReallyFlow. Show them how you can find off-market deals on ReallyFlow. Show them how you can analyze rehab projects because of HammerPoint, which is the calculator on ReallyFlow. It's the same tool that all the contractors use for estimating repairs and remodeling. You've got it at your disposal. Take your laptop with you everywhere. Show your value. You've got an advantage. Most agents have no clue about this stuff. 99% of them. I can promise you that's a fact. So use it to your advantage. Be confident, be bold, ask for what you want. Sound good?
Indeed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, listen, guys, I'll see you in your one-on-ones. Any questions? We'll stay open for another minute here. We got Dana Truman on the line. Being patient and anything you want to add, Dana?
I just saw, another good-looking coastie on Dutch was over there on that side. So you guys are lucky. You got 2 of us again.
There you go. Yeah.
That's what
Okay.
yeah. This
Yes,
kind of
sir.
information helps you with your value add lifetime client stuff, because you're always, if you are ahead of your clients, are always looking to you for answers, and you need to be. You need to constantly study. You need to read The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera. And this kind of stuff is so important, especially when he was talking about, why the child tax credit and this will most likely get renewed. That was like an outstanding point. So, yeah, got to show
Mhm.
up.
Yeah. Thanks, Dana. Hey, Mike, I remembered you did leave a chat earlier asking about doing a UCC search in a commercial transaction. It's Mike McGran, sorry. Well, let me explain what that is. Mike might have stepped away a
I'm
second. So
listening.
UCC, oh, there you go. It's Uniform Commercial Code. So what it is, guys, is actually it's funny I just mentioned it. So remember I told you a few minutes ago, Dave Ramsey had a commercial note get called in, and it triggered an avalanche of other commercial lenders calling his notes because they all connect with each other. They're reciprocal. They share information. So what Mike's asking about is, um, let's say let's say somebody comes in and wants to buy a commercial property in Mike's in College Station, um, Texas. And by the way, Mike, congratulations on the Aggies. I think you guys actually pulled it out and beat Louisiana, didn't you?
It was an incredible game. I actually went to the game with a close friend of mine. I
Oh,
was really fortunate. The the whole network of keeping up with your old friends. This was a neighbor of mine that I grew up with, sold me or two extra tickets like the day before the game. So it was incredible.
awesome. Well, you surely picked a doozy. But so in any case, let's say Mike has a buyer coming in. He wants to buy a 12 unit building, 13 unit building, 12 unit building. The commercial entity, the lenders, for example, and even the commercial uh, brokers and owners. I don't know to what extent, but the principle is this, or the theory is this: they can share, right? They can find out what this guy's using as collateral, what he's using. He says, look, I'm going to buy this property, and I'm going to leverage my other assets. I'm pledging my other assets to be able to get a loan to buy this property. Well, the whoever he's talking to, whatever lender, can notify all the other lenders that have loans on those properties, and he can notify. I think he can even notify um, other parties, other people involved. But that's essentially it's creditor to creditor. It's the main purpose of it. But I don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure there are other parties that can also be involved to be notified. But one creditor can notify the other creditors that this buyer is pledging or indicating he has these other assets he's using to be able to buy this new property. Um, and it sounds crazy, but it's true because what these other lenders can do then, and remember, they qualify you at the time that you buy a property. But in the commercial world, what that's could be alluding to is later on, 5 years later, if you buy another property, your current lender that you borrowed money from 5 years ago could come back and say, well, we think you're over leveraged now, right? Um, that's a scary, scary thought. So, but they're doing it. I've never had it be a problem. I don't know anybody that personally that ever had a problem as a result of that. I don't think that's what happened to Dave Ramsey. Um, that was a different story altogether. But that's my understanding. It's not something you would request yourself. The lenders do it. The creditors do it. So it could even involve private lenders. I don't know. But that's Mike. Is that so? I don't know if I answered the question. That's what that is. But don't be surprised if a lender brings that up or does that, and it could have an impact on your transaction.
Yeah, the situation is the buyer that I'm representing is a cash buyer. The seller, I've been told by the seller, it was family money. This is the client of mine whose family out of the country helped him finance the development, construction, and ownership of the property. So they're kind of like a one owner turnkey project. So is the UCC search applicable in this case, and who does it benefit? Like, am I ordering it from someone for my buyer if he wants that, or how does that work?
No, if he wants to do it, the buyer, well, first off, he would have to put that in the agreement. I don't think a buyer would normally do that, quite frankly.
I I
But
I, I sent to you in the chat. I sent you the wording out of the contract.
Okay, UCC search. So this is the buyer's request within days after the effective date. Seller or seller's expense will furnish buyer a uniform commercial code search prepared by a reporting service and dated after the effective date. The search must identify documents that are on file with the Texas Secretary of State in the county where the property is located that relate to the personal property on the property and show as debtor, seller, and all other owners of the personal property in the last 5 years. Buyer does not require seller to furnish UCC search. So he checked. So he didn't check either box one or box two.
He's
Um,
wanting me to check to do the UCC search. He's asking for it. I had selected to not do it. He's asking me to select it to do it, which is
yeah.
fine. We're in a draft offer situation. I'm just trying to write it the way he wants it.
Well, the seller is going to be responsible for it. And the seller could ask you, hey, Mike, can you get this done for me? But quite frankly, if he's paying cash, there's no lender involved, and when it goes to closing, the title company is going to make sure all liens are satisfied, or they won't provide clear title and the seller can't sell. I'm just not real clear on why the seller is asking this in this circumstance.
Well,
To be honest with you,
the buyer's asking.
I mean, the buyer's asking for it. Yeah. It just doesn't, I mean, I know when I buy a property, I really could really care less what the seller's got unless he's really over leveraged and I don't want to waste my time. Maybe that's why this guy's doing it. He wants to make sure the seller's not over leveraged because he didn't want us to get to the closing table or get close to it, spend money on inspections, only to find out that the seller, he's not going to be able to pay off his debts and they're not going to go away. The title company won't be able to satisfy them because they won't be able to provide clear title. So maybe he's fearful that the seller has loans out there that he's not disclosing or something. I don't know, but that I can see your seller saying, nonsense on that one, you know. But if the buyer wants you to ask for it, you've got to ask for it, you know. And the seller, if the seller doesn't know what it is, you have to explain to him what that is, and he'll have to provide documentation on about any loans he has. And quite frankly, if they're not recorded, it's not going to matter. If they have to be recorded. I mean, you could do a simple, you know, uh, preliminary title search for $175 and get this information. So but present it to the seller. I mean, if he just let me know if he's got questions. Um, we could even find out. We could go to your county's website, Michael, and search the property, and we can see if there's an additional person to be notified, like a bank on the tax records. Um, we could even look at the recordings, like the deed recordings and lien recordings. All that stuff's public information. We can see if he has recorded liens on the property. Because didn't your seller tell you at one point he doesn't have any loans on the property? Like there's nothing recorded. He doesn't owe Bank of America or anything like that, right?
Right. It was all cash, all family money.
Right.
It, that's the vibe he's getting is that they didn't use any debt, and the pace that he took things at, you would assume he didn't have debt because time was not of the essence in his development. And
Right. Well, the best thing
that's
to
what I'm
do
gonna
is,
run up against with his due diligence.
well, what I would do is uh, check it off because you have to your buyer. You got to do what your buyer wants, present it, and then tell the seller if you shouldn't have anything out there. There's no creditor involved. Um, but nonetheless, you've got to either get this done or have your seller counter back and say, look, he'll provide, you know, a do the title search, do preliminary search to show the guy that there's no recorded liens on the property, and that might satisfy the buyer. It's going to have to be done anyways. So, yeah. The only thing that could possibly happen, and it's a possibility, but not a probability, is the IRS could have something on your seller, and or the state of Texas. And when the title company does the title search, the state is one of the entities that gets notified in the IRS. And if they have anything, they can quickly file a lien and prevent the property from being sold. And I've seen that done before. Actually, we just had one happen in California. It took about 3 months to clear up just a few months ago. So that's a possibility. But the only way to know that, you're not going to get that through the UCC search. You're going to get that through a title search. Let the title company do their work. That's when that would come up. So, but I think, Mike, honestly, I would put the offer in with that checked off and just go through that discussion. If you want to get me on a phone call or something like that, I'm happy to do it,
Okay, thank you, Gary.
You're welcome. Well, there's an education right there, guys. Hope I didn't botch it.
Thanks, Mike, for that question. It was pretty new information I never heard of before. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Well, it's in the commercial world, but very rarely. I mean, I'm just kind of surprised by it. But this buyer could be very cautious and very sophisticated, So, okay, guys, I'm gonna go try to wind down before bedtime. So appreciate you showing up, participating. We'll see you next class, and we'll see you in your one-on-ones.
Thank you for watching this episode of Monday Night Live. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.